On March 31st, President Bukele quietly rewrote El Salvador's residency rules and reshaped the country's path to citizenship along the way. Foreigners now need to spend 3 times less on Salvadorian soil to keep their status, in a similar move the UAE used to attract talent and capital. In this video, you'll learn what changed, your 3 main routes into the country, and the catch buried in the same decree that anyone chasing a Salvadoran passport needs to know. Let's get into it. El Salvador's Legislative Assembly passed the reform on March 17th with overwhelming support. President Bukele signed Decree 531 3 days later, and the law took effect on March 31st. At the center of the reform is the physical presence requirement for temporary residents. Under the old framework, residents had to be in El Salvador for 9 months out of every year and could not be absent for more than 90 consecutive days. Eleonora de Marroquin, head of the Foreigners Division at the General Directorate of Migration, told legislators that residents who traveled frequently for work, aka El Salvador's prime market, routinely returned to find their residency cancelled, forcing them to start the application and path to citizenship from scratch. The amended Article 119 replaces 9 months with just 90 days a year, consecutive or accumulated. A force majeure exception exists, but the decree requires the applicant to justify it formally before the directorate. Casual non-compliance will not qualify. So that single change moves El Salvador from one of the most demanding presence regimes in the region to one of the lightest touch. Uruguay, by comparison, requires just 60 days a year during its 3 to 5 year naturalization track, if you're looking for an even more lenient presence requirement. Now, with Decree 531 in force, El Salvador is competitive with the most flexible setups in the hemisphere. But what's the actual entry point? 3 main routes are open to most foreigners considering El Salvador, the last of which we'll cover in a minute or two. The independent means visa is the most popular of the 3 and splits into 2 tracks. The pensioners track requires a monthly pension of at least $1,200 from a foreign source, 3 times the country's minimum wage in commerce and services. Rentista applicants, on the other hand, need to show just $1,600 a month from permanent and stable foreign income from rental income, investment returns, or another reliable source. Both tracks let you bring a spouse or common law partner and dependent children, and both prohibit paid work inside El Salvador. Applicants choose between a 1-year or 2-year permit. Fees range from $70 for Central American nationals on a 1-year permit up to $260 for non-Central Americans on a 2-year permit. After 3 years of legal residence, now at least 90 days a year, you can apply for permanent residency. At 5 years, you become eligible for naturalization. Worth mentioning, Spanish and Latin American nationals get a fast lane and can naturalize after just 1 year. The second route is the Digital Nomad Residence Program, introduced in 2021. Applicants post a $1,000 government bond and pay a $300 processing fee. It runs 3 years initially and is renewable, and the program rules don't document a formal minimum income, which is unusual for this kind of permit. Most digital nomad visas worldwide are dead-end permits with no path to permanent residency, much less a passport. But what makes El Salvador's digital nomad route stands out is that it does indeed lead to permanent residency at 5 years and citizenship at 10. That's a slower track than the independent means visa, and the 90-day presence rule still applies, but a remote work permit that compounds into a passport is genuinely rare. In Latin America, though, written law and lived practice tend to diverge. Application timelines, document requirements, and the unwritten parts of the process often look different on the ground than they do in the government gazette. That's the kind of intelligence IMI Sovereigns members get through our private online community, where you can ping vetted attorneys and program specialists in the jurisdiction you're planning to move to or invest in and get a real answer back. So, back to Decree 531. The 90-day reform got the headlines, but 2 other parts of the framework are critical for anyone considering citizenship. First is Article 279, which now spells out 2 specific grounds on which a naturalized Salvadorian loses their citizenship. One ground is residential, a naturalized citizen who lives in their original country of origin for more than 2 consecutive years, or who is absent from El Salvador for more than 5 consecutive years, forfeits Salvadorian nationality unless they hold a special permit under Article 280. The other ground is criminal. Conviction for a serious international crime triggers permanent loss of citizenship with no recovery option. Now, these provisions mirror language in Article 94 of the Salvadoran Constitution that has existed since 1983. What's new is that the implementing legislation now codifies them in procedural detail. In practice, the rules are now enforceable in a way they previously weren't. A second, quieter change addresses Salvadoran nationality for children born abroad before their parents became Salvadoran. Under the new Article 164, those children can be claimed as Salvadoran by parental request. Once they turn 18, they have to declare their willingness to keep the nationality or it lapses. If you're starting to map your options, El Salvador is just one of nearly 200 jurisdictions with a path to citizenship, and most countries offer more than one route: naturalization, marriage, birth, descent, investment, exception, and a few others. IMI sovereigns use the IMI Citizenship Catalogue to compare every path across 196 countries through 7 different routes side by side. Of course, not everyone wants to wait 5 years and meet annual presence quotas. For investors who don't, El Salvador also runs a citizenship by investment program, the last of the 3 entry points we mentioned earlier. Capped at $1,000 per year and governed by Legislative Decree 747, the Freedom Passport requires a one-time donation of $1 million US, payable in Bitcoin or USDT. Application fees run another $1,000, with another $1,000 per family member added on top. Approval routes the applicant straight into naturalization by bypassing the residency track entirely. Plus, it takes just 2 months to go completely through the process. That's the upfront math, but the catch is what Decree 531 just codified. A Freedom Passport holder who walks away from El Salvador for 5 consecutive years can lose the citizenship they paid $1 million to acquire. The enforcement mechanism is now sharper, and anyone buying in needs to plan for periodic, documented presence in the country, not just a one-time visit to collect the passport. But if El Salvador fits your profile and you obtain citizenship through naturalization or by investment, what does citizenship unlock once you have it? More than the visa-free count suggests. El Salvador is a member of the Central American Four, the regional settlement bloc that links it with Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Under the CA4 agreement, nationals of all 4 countries cross between them passport-free, using only national ID cards. The agreement doesn't formally grant a permanent settlement right, but in practice the 4 governments don't treat each other's citizens as foreigners. CA4 nationals can live, work and study across the bloc with minimal restrictions. Enforcement is loose enough that the CA4 functions as one of the most integrated mobility zones in the Americas, even though much of it lives in custom rather than statute. For anyone holding a Salvadoran passport, that's a meaningful overlay on the basic visa-free count of 87 visa-free destinations, including the Schengen area, Russia, Singapore, and the UAE. In practice, it also unlocks de facto residency rights across 3 more countries that the headline number doesn't capture. So why now? IMI Pro Alex Recurso of Citizen X, who you can contact directly on imidaily.com, sees the reform as deliberate. Easier company incorporations, lower presence requirements to keep temporary resident status, and a steady drip of commercial reforms layered on top. He says it's the same playbook the UAE followed, designed to give people the time and the infrastructure to decide whether they want to make El Salvador their permanent base. The supporting evidence is tangible. In December 2025, the Legislative Assembly extended free registration for simplified joint stock companies through 2026. A March 2026 reform to the small business law cut more friction from company formation, layered on top of Bitcoin as legal tender, a territorial tax system, and the country's transformation from the highest homicide rate in the world to the safest in the Americas. El Salvador is now framing itself as a landing spot for crypto investors, entrepreneurs, and remote capital. Whether the playbook produces the same results as Dubai is an open question, but the structure is there, and the 90-day presence rule is the last piece slotting into place. For most viewers thinking seriously about El Salvador, the Bitcoin angle is serious. How the country treats digital assets is part of why it's on the shortlist in this video on your screen now, which covers countries where you can pay 0% tax on crypto gains in 2026. Watch it on your screen now and subscribe to IMI Daily so the next policy shift doesn't catch you off guard. See you in the next one.